Hey gang, welcome back to Directionally Speaking. I'm Jeff Zentz, Senior Director of Innovation for Agrinovus, Indiana. I'm here with Henry from Integrated Dynamics. We're going to talk a little bit about their journey as an organization. And so I'd love to turn it over to Henry to introduce himself in the business, and then we'll dive into the chat.
Hey folks, I'm Henry Markarian. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Integrated Dynamics. I'm calling you folks today from wonderful sunny Chicago, Illinois. It's 70 degrees, so somewhere out there pigs must be flying or hell must be frozen over. Either or. Um, yeah, I'd love to intro who I am, what I'm doing. So I'm born and raised here in Chicago with the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Um, Started Integrated Dynamics in the last semester of my senior year after a trip out to the Bay Area, thanks to the Technology Entrepreneurship Center. Really had in my head at that time concepts of how to make renewable fuels more accessible in an era where there was way more demand than there was supply for commodity precursors like hydrogen and whatnot. Eventually got together with the co-founders here, and we've been at it for about 2 years. And as a baseline for what Integrated Dynamics does, we're an advanced bioprocess company developing something known as a high temperature fermentation platform. If you imagine comparable biomanufacturing platforms, generally they're quite restrictive on what kind of feedstocks you can use. You're pretty much restricted to cornstarch, corn derivatives, or dextrose if you're in pharma or specialty chemical. And you have lots of complications around there being a lot of intermediate processes such as chemical or enzymatic pretreatment, and even then separation, contamination issues, hygiene, a lot of compounding issues that make it not as competitive, it being bioengineering, not as competitive towards chemical solutions to the same problems. But by using microbes that we found and engineered to grow near the boiling point of water, we're able to use things like cellulosic feedstocks really easily and break them down into a wide variety of very high volume commodity chemicals, I should say.
Henry, that's super exciting. Talk to us a little bit about like what stage the company's at and kind of what is on the horizon at the current moment.
Sure. So what we've done is front load, I should say, a lot of our technical work up to working with our microbe and in its wild state, developing engineering tools, then planning out exactly how we need to edit it. So right now we're in pure scaling mode. Our lab, which is just 50 feet over that way, has a bunch of custom-built reactors and bioscale reactions where we're able to figure out the best circumstances which we can put together, for example, an ethanol or hydrogen yielding reaction. And then we take that and put that in our 2 liter reactor, then up to our 5 liter reactor. Over the summer, we'll be scaling to 50 liters, and then in 2026, far past that by partnering with existing biofuels companies.
That's super exciting. Um, what does talk to us about just your own journey to becoming an entrepreneur. Um, did you always know you wanted to be an entrepreneur and start something, or is this something you stumbled into? How did you end up here?
I can't, give too much credit to myself here. I was bred into it. Both of my parents are entrepreneurs. My mom was born in the Soviet Union, where this kind of stuff was kind of frowned upon, and her family had sold jewelry for about 200 years beforehand. So coming to America and starting their own business was a heavy inspiration for me. And at the same time, my dad works by himself. So when I came into college, I was thinking, yeah, I want to do computer engineering. Yeah, I want to mess around with circuits and code and stuff like this. But I also want to go out on my own here. And basically, I lucked out. First class I ever took was Ukrainian 113, History and Culture, just a gen ed that I randomly signed up for. I don't know anything about Ukraine. I didn't at the time either. And some kid sitting next to me, his name is Alex, just wouldn't stop talking about batteries. And about a year later, I had joined a startup. They're still in operation at University of Illinois. They're called Natrion. They do advanced battery technologies. And through that experience, super grateful for it. I was able to expose myself to the intersection of industry, sustainability, and national interests. Got to work with service members, figuring out ways to deploy batteries abroad. And I eventually ended up cycling out of that company. Just wanted to go out on my own at that point. Spent a little bit more time thinking about what my competencies are, what I like to do by myself outside of just the research I did in college. And then at the basically precipice of the last semester I was in, going into college, the University of Illinois Technology Entrepreneurship Center flew me out to the Bay Area. And at that time, we had visited a company that had a sizable University of Illinois presence in their alumni or in their current employee population that was dealing with hydrogen fuel cells and electrolyzers. And I had a line of questioning that I had developed as I was visiting, over this very long factory tour, and eventually came to the conclusion that unlike most commodity markets, which we look at are like regular sized triangles where you have a lot of the underlying materials. If you imagine there's Lamborghinis at the top of the automotive industry, but all the way at the bottom, there's things like gasoline and the steel needed to build cars, and a whole bunch of Honda Civics, right? I felt like the hydrogen industry and further the synthetic fuels industry was an upside down triangle. There was an immense amount of effort and money and investment and time and so forth and so on being put into actually doing things with hydrogen. But there was very little availability. The company that I had visited, only 5% of their total gas flow through their reactors and systems had actually been hydrogen. The rest was natural gas. And of course, they didn't advertise that at the time. So I came back. I thought to myself, well, there must be some better way to make hydrogen. You have electrolysis, and that's shocking water until it splits into hydrogen, carbon dioxide. And at the time, I was a 22-year-old with a degree in computer engineering. I'm not going up against the giant players and the breakthrough energy funded companies with billions and more dollars of capital. And steam methane reforming just wasn't sustainable enough to support the sustainability goals we were after. So, funny story, I had gotten back to Champagne and I was eating a banana. And when you open a banana and the top is a little bit brown and you just without even thinking, you rip it off, throw it in the trash. And I had this revelation. I was like, what happens to that when it goes to the landfill? Does an animal eat it or do bacteria or something break it down? And I had this 15-minute Wikipedia session where I had essentially rediscovered what anaerobic digestion was, but I wasn't satisfied. That made methane, and I wanted a way to integrate it and you know consolidate, let's say, produce more valuable chemicals like hydrogen and carbon dioxide for use in sustainable aviation fuel or chemical synthesis, so forth and so on. And eventually, I got back to campus. I said, "Well, I don't know anything about biology. Last bio class I took was in high school. So I went to the registrar for the bioengineering school at Illinois, asked them nicely to send an email to everyone. They said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Please." And they sent an email to everyone. I got an email back from my CTO in Ranjan who said, "Mr. Markarian, sounds like a great idea." I said, "Don't ever call me Mr. Markarian again. You're 2 years younger than me." And from there, we started going. We joined, so that was in January of 23. We met our preeminent backers at 1517 Fund just shortly after, and they helped accelerate us through this process. We also got some support from Illinois Ventures, and then we joined a program called Nucleate. So it's for kind of climate tech and biotech based companies to bring together technical co-founders, which we both were, with MBA students. And we met Jake. Jake, who's our chief commercialization officer, had a wealth of experience in commercialization, both on the venture capital side and not. And we just accelerated from there. And we all went about full time about a year ago, raised a little bit more funding, and then brought on our most recent employee. We've got Corey Canale, who's our head of synthetic biology, and we've just been, I guess, churning and burning ever since.
Henry, that's so exciting. And as you guys are moving forward, you know, lots of lessons get learned as we're building. But you're in this space that is heavy on the technology side. Also, not the easiest market to like really bring a product to market on. Um, what are like one or two things you've learned over the course of this journey that you're like, man, if I'd have known that from the start, it would have been so helpful.
Mm. I, I would say that human capital is the most important kind of capital you deal with. No amount of money can ever make up for not having A players on your team. And as a part of this, you also have to kind of figure out ways to eke out top tier talent. It's not like you can walk up to somebody and say, "Are you the best at what you do?" and have them say no, because anyone with a brain between their two ears would say, "Yeah, of course." So we've developed a lot of really, honestly, I'll say kooky ways to figure out who the top performer, who the A player in the room is. Our interviews are now full of like almost riddles, as Jake says, and a lot of questions that you wouldn't even expect. Like, what's the coolest thing you've ever done? Jake's answer to that was he jumped out of planes over Kabul. I don't even know what my answer to that. I've never asked that myself. And then the second thing, you have to think outside of your own head, I think. I'm an engineer by training, but I grew up building things with my two hands. My dad builds houses, so I had uh, unsupervised access to power tools, let's say. And that's great for when you need to put something together. But A lot of people don't see eye to eye with you. I learned this most when I was at Natreon working with service members. Pardon me. It's very hard for you to have a conversation with someone who's in a very different station in life than you. For example, me, second year college student, when I was at Natreon studying electrical and computer engineering, talking to an active service member. And something that was said to me was, people like you end up killing people like me, which is a lot for a 20-year-old to handle, but it's true. If you don't know how to look through somebody else's eyes, be it a service member or an ethanol producer or a farmer or a venture capitalist or a strategic partner, you're never going to know what they want. You're never going to be able to even develop a mental model of how they would judge you. So yeah, it would be the two biggest lessons that I've had is you really have to learn how to develop systems for finding top tier human capital. It's the most critical part. And also, there's this certain business wise empathy that you have to develop because what I want as an engineer is for people to give me as many Lego sets as possible. And if I can assemble them into an engineering company, that would be great. But what everyone else wants has to do with either money or killing pain points or, sustainability, all of these sorts of things.
It's so good, Henry, and thank you for sharing that. It's so resonant with me as somebody who supports early stage founders, and also I think to our audience. Let's shift gears for a second. Let's talk about you guys are part of this inaugural Agronovus Velocity program. What are some of the things that you guys are hoping that this program will help accelerate even further integrated dynamics?
Well, I am Jeff, a dyed in the wool Midwesterner, and I intend to keep a very large portion of our company's footprint by, of, and for the Midwest. When I talk about, ethanol, for example, being a point-to-point industry here, where you have the American surplus of what is it, 13.7 billion bushels of corn, and that comes into $34 billion worth of ethanol. And thinking about how we can expand that to be instead of just all these bushels of corn, but the billion tons of agricultural waste we have, and instead of just ethanol, all of these other oil-based chemicals that we could replace. I think about how that requires, as I mentioned, that business side empathy for me to actually seek out and understand the experiences of people who are either in the biomanufacturing space, are in the agricultural space, or the chemical space. And being able to partner with Agronovus here gives us insight outside of the state we're currently in, out here in Illinois, into not only Indiana, but also a wealth of interconnected farmers, ag professionals, so forth and so on, so that we can learn, hey, there's this niche, needs to be decarbonized, the state wants to support it, and there's a lot of XYZ feedstock you can make it into. And that's the golden ticket for us.
I love that. Henry, I know that we're recording this on Pi Day and you've got a piece of key lime pie waiting. So we're going to get down to the last question of the day. There's a whole group of people listening to this session, learning more about what you're doing in the business. Obviously, customers and capital are two super important pieces, and we can't ask for capital publicly. I'll take that off the table for you. Where can the audience of this podcast, where can they help? Where could they plug in? What things could, if they're listening to this, they could go, hey, I might have a connection for them or be able to help them some way.
Sure. The most challenging part of what we do is not in the lab, and it's not talking to customers either. If you have a solid value proposition, which we've developed, especially for our beachhead, in kind of recycling ethanol waste, so DDGs, silage, stuff like that, into value chemicals, then there's not too many bumps there. And also, if you know what you're doing in the lab, like our technical team does, then not too much of an issue there. But the logistics gets to be challenging, coordinating the the middle ground between commercialization and technology. So the only ask that I would have is if you are someone who's intimately connected or has really broad strokes knowledge about how agricultural supply chains work, especially as it transitions from what would be considered food adjacent all the way to chemicals like ethanol and carbon dioxide, things like this. I'd love to talk to you. Love to pick your brain, figure out how we can better source our, residuals or cellulosic feedstocks and better provide chemical and otherwise just general manufacturing solutions to advance Midwestern's posture, or the Midwest posture, I should say, for biomanufacturing.
All right, Henry, that gets you off the hot seat. Everybody, join me in thanking Henry from Integrated Dynamics for being part of Directionally Speaking today. Thanks for taking your time, and we will talk to you soon.